The glass of grape juice flew directly toward my white dress. The purple liquid spread across the fabric like a stain of shame for everyone to see. Piper Whitman, my own 8-year-old granddaughter, stared at me with a mischievous grin, holding the empty glass in her small hands. The silence lasted barely 2 seconds before the entire living room exploded in laughter. "Piper, you are terrible!" My daughter-in-law, Vanessa Cole, shrieked between bursts of laughter, but there wasn't a hint of a reprimand in her voice. Instead, she seemed proud of what her daughter had done. My son, Danny Whitman, covered his mouth to hide his amusement, but his eyes glittered with enjoyment. The other guests pointed at my ruined dress and whispered comments they thought I couldn't hear. "Mommy said you don't belong here," Piper murmured with that false innocence only a manipulated child can display. Her words echoed in my ears like church bells on a Sunday morning. Clear and impossible to ignore. Vanessa didn't deny anything. She just kept laughing as she served more cake, acting as if ruining a 64-year-old woman's dress was the perfect entertainment for her birthday party. I stayed seated in that uncomfortable chair, feeling the juice stick to my skin and stain the dress I had bought especially for the occasion. I had spent $150 on that dress, money I truly couldn't afford, but I did it because I thought that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. I thought perhaps my family would treat me with respect for once in my life. How naive I had been. How foolish to believe that anything had changed after all these years of humiliations and disrespect. My hands trembled slightly as I got up from the chair. But I held my head high. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Not here. Not in front of all these strangers who now had a funny story to tell in their own homes about the old woman who was humiliated at a birthday party. "Aren't you going to say anything, Grandma?" Piper asked in that sweet voice that adults find adorable, but which I recognized as pure venom. The child had been coached for this. Someone had taught her exactly what to say and when to say it. My eyes drifted toward Vanessa, who continued to smile as she cut more pieces of cake, completely satisfied with the show she had orchestrated. "No, sweetie," I replied in a voice so calm it surprised even me. "I don't have anything to say." I headed toward the kitchen to find something to clean myself with, but I knew the damage was done. The dress was ruined, my dignity trampled, and my heart broken once more by the family who was supposed to love me. In the kitchen, as I futilely rubbed the purple stains with a damp towel, I could hear the laughter continuing in the living room. Someone had turned the music up louder, as if they wanted to celebrate my humiliation with a soundtrack. My hands moved automatically, wiping and rubbing, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. I was recalling all the times I had come to these family gatherings with hope in my heart. All the times I had brought gifts no one appreciated, food no one ate, and love no one wanted to receive. For years I had believed the problem was me. That perhaps I didn't know how to approach my own family. That maybe I was too old or too boring to fit into their modern lives. But standing there in that kitchen with my ruined dress and my pride in pieces, I finally understood the truth I had been denying for so many years. They didn't want me there. They never had. I was just a family obligation they tolerated out of manners, a burden they had to endure on special dates because it was the right thing to do. The music from the living room grew louder and the voices more cheerful. It was as if my absence had improved the party, as if they could finally relax and truly enjoy themselves now that the uncomfortable old woman was out of sight. Piper was probably receiving congratulations for her mischief, and Vanessa would be telling the story over and over, adding dramatic details each time she repeated it. I left the towel on the counter and headed toward the front door. No one noticed when I grabbed my purse and keys. No one said goodbye when I opened the door. No one asked if I needed help or if I was okay. I just walked out of that house in silence with my stained dress and my heart finally clear about what I had to do. The fresh night air hit my face as I reached my car. My hands trembled slightly as I searched for my keys in my bag. But it wasn't from sadness. It was something different. It was the feeling of someone who has finally woken up after a very long, very painful sleep. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at myself in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me had dry eyes and an expression I hadn't seen in years. Determination. That was what I saw in my reflection. Pure cold determination, like December ice. This wasn't the first time my family had treated me like I was invisible. As I drove back to my small apartment, memories began to flow like water from a broken dam. Every week for the last 5 years had been a repetition of the same humiliating pattern. The invitations always arrived at the last minute, as if I were an afterthought. Grace, come over for Sunday dinner. Nothing special, just family. But I knew it was never nothing special to them. I was the filler, the person who completed the head count so the table didn't look so empty. I always arrived with something homemade, a dessert that had taken me hours to prepare, or an appetizer I had seen in a magazine and wanted to try. I spent between $30 and $50 each time on ingredients I truly couldn't afford, waking up at 5 in the morning to have everything ready, and each time it was the same. They left my food in a corner of the table while everyone else rushed over the main dish brought by some other guest. "This looks so delicious," they would say, completely ignoring my contribution. By the end of the afternoon, my container always returned home with me, nearly untouched, with barely 1 or 2 servings taken out of courtesy. I remembered Danny's birthday last year. I had spent $200 that I didn't have on a watch he had mentioned wanting. I took 2 buses to get to the downtown jewelry store because I couldn't afford a taxi, and I arrived home with swollen feet and a heart full of expectation. I thought that maybe, just maybe, my gift would be the one that excited him the most. When it was time to open gifts, Danny unwrapped mine last, almost as a formality. "Thanks, Mom," he mumbled without even looking at the watch properly, and left it on the table to continue with Vanessa's gift. She had bought him a shirt that cost half of what I had spent, but he tried it on immediately and spent the rest of the afternoon showing it off to all the guests. My watch was forgotten among the crumpled wrapping paper and used napkins. No one else saw it. No one asked how much it had cost or where I had gotten it. To them, it was just another gift from old Grace, something they expected to receive. But that generated no real excitement or gratitude. Piper's celebrations were even worse. Every time she had a school play or a swim meet, I was the only one who didn't receive a formal invitation. I would find out by chance when I overheard Danny mentioning it on the phone, and I would have to timidly ask if I could go. "Sure, Mom, you can come if you want," he always said, with that tone that made it clear my presence was optional and not particularly desired. I arrived at those events with flowers I had bought with my grocery money, sitting in the back row, while Danny and Vanessa took the best seats in the front. When Piper went on stage or stepped onto the podium, I clapped louder than anyone, my heart swelling with pride for my only granddaughter. But afterward, when everyone gathered for family photos, I was always left out of the frame. "It's just for the parents," Vanessa would explain with that fake smile she had perfected over the years. I would step aside and watch them pose for dozens of pictures that they would later upload to social media. In none of those images was there any evidence that Piper had a grandmother who adored her and who had been there supporting her from the stands. Sunday family gatherings at Danny's house were exercises in emotional endurance. I arrived promptly at 12 noon, as I had always been taught was correct, but the meal was never ready until 3 hours in the afternoon. While I waited, I would sit in the living room watching Danny play video games with Piper or Vanessa talk on the phone with her friends about plans that didn't include me. "Can I help with anything in the kitchen?" I always offered, but Vanessa rejected me with a wave of her hand. "Don't worry, Grace. Everything is under control." So I sat there for hours, feeling like an old piece of furniture that no one wanted, but no one dared to throw away either. When they finally served the food, I always ended up in the most uncomfortable chair, usually the one near the kitchen so I could help serve if necessary. Conversations flowed around my presence like water around a rock. They talked about people I didn't know, places I hadn't been, plans that didn't include me. "Remember when we went to that new restaurant last month?" Danny would ask Vanessa, and she would start telling a detailed story about a family dinner to which I hadn't been invited. I chewed my food in silence, wondering why I kept going to these gatherings that only served to remind me how little I mattered in their lives. But the worst of all was Christmas. For years, I had spent up to $500 on gifts for Danny, Vanessa, and Piper. money I had to save for months by working extra hours at my part-time office job. I wrapped each gift carefully using expensive paper and elegant bows, writing personal cards with messages full of love. Their gifts for me always arrived unwrapped or hastily wrapped in newspaper. They were usually things they had bought at the last minute at the discount store, or worse, things they no longer wanted and decided to give to me. Once Vanessa gave me a face cream that was half used, explaining that it hadn't worked well for her, but maybe I would like it. I smiled and thanked them as if it were the most wonderful gift in the world, because that was what was expected of me, to be grateful, to be humble, to accept the crumbs of affection they decided to give me and act as if it were a feast. Now, sitting in my car outside my apartment building with my dress ruined by Piper's grape juice, I could finally see the whole situation with crystal clarity. It wasn't love that kept me going to those meetings. It was fear. Fear of being completely alone. Fear of admitting that the family for whom I had sacrificed so much for so many years didn't truly want me. But tonight something had changed inside me. Today's humiliation had been different because it was public and deliberate. It hadn't been just neglect or thoughtlessness. It had been pure cruelty, specifically designed to make me feel small and insignificant in front of strangers, and I had allowed it to happen. I had sat there accepting the mistreatment as if it were normal, as if it were what I deserved. But no more. The first time Danny asked me for money, I was 58 years old and had just been widowed. My husband, Robert Bob Whitman, had died of a heart attack while working in the garden one April morning, leaving me with a small inheritance and a loneliness that I thought my children would fill. How wrong I was. Danny came to my house 3 weeks after the funeral with red eyes and a story about problems at his job. "Mom, I need $5,000. It's temporary. I swear I'll pay you back in 2 months." He looked so desperate, so vulnerable that I couldn't say no. That money came from Bob's life insurance. Money I had planned to use to fix the leaky roof and replace the old windows in the house. The 2 months turned into 6, then a year. When I finally dared to ask him about the money, Danny got angry with me. "Seriously? You're going to pressure me for money when you just got widowed? I thought you wanted to help your family." Guilt consumed me for weeks. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe a good mother shouldn't worry about money when her son was in trouble. That was just the first of many emergencies that required my financial help. The next year, he needed $3,000 to pay off a credit card debt. Then it was $2,000 to cover the deposit for a bigger apartment. Then $100 to fix his car. Each time he promised to pay me back, and each time I ended up waiting months without seeing a single dollar returned. But what hurt the most wasn't losing the money. It was the way they treated me after each loan. Instead of gratitude, I received indifference. Instead of respect, I received that condescending attitude that clearly said they expected my help as if it were their right, not my generosity. I vividly remembered the day Vanessa asked me to co-sign for their first house. She was barely 23 and didn't have enough credit history. "Grace, we need you to sign these papers." "It's just a formality." "You won't have to pay anything. We just need your name so the bank approves the loan." They took me to the bank office dressed in my best suit, the same one I had worn to Bob's funeral. The loan officer explained the terms of the contract, but I barely understood half of what he was saying. Danny and Vanessa assured me it was routine that thousands of parents did the same for their children every day. "Just sign here, Mom, trust us." And I signed. I signed because I wanted to believe that they finally saw me as an important part of their lives. I signed because I thought maybe this would make them value me more. I signed because a naive part of me believed this would turn me into a grandmother that Piper would remember fondly when she was older. For the first 2 years, everything seemed to be going well. Danny had a stable job at a local construction firm, and Vanessa worked part-time at a retail store. They made their monthly payments without problems, and I felt proud to have been able to help them get their first house. I finally had something concrete I had done for my family, something that truly mattered. But then Danny lost his job. The company he worked for went bankrupt during the economic crisis, leaving dozens of employees without work and without the benefits they had been promised. Suddenly, mortgage payments became impossible to keep up with. I found out about the situation not because they told me directly, but because the bank called me as the co-signer, Ms. Whitman. The payments for the property you co-signed for on Elmwood Avenue are 3 months past due. If they are not brought current immediately, we will have to proceed with the foreclosure process. The bank employee's voice was cold and professional, but his words hit me like a hammer blow to the chest. When I confronted Danny about the situation, he yelled at me for the first time in his adult life. "It's not my fault I lost my job. Do you think I wanted this to happen? And now you're pressuring me like I'm some kind of criminal." Vanessa was standing behind him with Piper in her arms, looking at me as if I were responsible for all their problems. That night, I went home and calculated exactly how much money I had saved. If I paid the 3 months of back mortgage payments, I would have less than $1,000 left in my savings account. But if I didn't pay, they would lose the house and my credit would be ruined forever. I had no real option. I paid the $8,000 they owed, practically emptying all my emergency reserves. They thanked me. Danny mumbled a thank you without looking me in the eye. Vanessa didn't even do that. They acted as if it had been my obligation to pay, as if signing as co-signer had automatically made me responsible for their financial errors. And the worst part was that technically they were right. The following months were a hell of constant calls from the bank. Every time Danny and Vanessa were late on a payment, I was the first to find out. My phone would ring at 8 in the morning with bank employees, reminding me of my contractual obligations, as if I were a professional debtor instead of a mother who had wanted to help her son. I had to get a second job cleaning offices at night to cover the payments when they couldn't. I arrived home at 11 at night with a sore back and hands cracked by the chemicals, all to keep afloat a house in which I was not welcome, because that was the ultimate insult. After all the money I had put in, after risking my financial stability for them, I was still treated like an awkward visitor when I went to their house. They never offered me a key. They never told me, "This is your home too." They never acknowledged that without my sacrifice, they would be living in a rented apartment or back with their parents. The situation worsened when they decided to remodel the kitchen. "It's an investment," Danny explained when he asked me for another $4,000 for the new cabinets and appliances. "It's going to increase the property value." I knew it was a lie. I knew they simply wanted a nicer kitchen and expected me to pay for it. But I felt so trapped at that moment that I agreed. I worked double shifts for 6 months to raise that money. My feet swelled so much that I had to sleep with my legs elevated, and I developed chronic back pain that still bothers me to this day. All to pay for the wood cabinets that Vanessa had seen in a magazine and decided she needed in her kitchen. The inauguration of the new kitchen was a party for 30 people to which I was not invited. I found out through the photos Danny uploaded to Facebook, where everyone appeared to be toasting and celebrating the kitchen I had paid for. In one of the photos, Vanessa posed proudly next to the new granite island with a wine glass in her hand and a radiant smile. That night, I called Danny to ask him why I hadn't been invited. "We didn't think you'd be interested, Mom. You know, you don't like crowds." It was a lie, and we both knew it. The truth was that my presence would have been uncomfortable for them. How could they show off their new kitchen in front of their friends if the woman who had actually paid for it was there to remind them of the reality? That was the first time I truly considered the possibility that my family was using me. But even then, even with all the evidence before my eyes, I found ways to justify their behavior. They're young, I told myself. They don't understand the value of money yet. Someday they will thank me properly. How blind I had been. How desperate to be loved I had been, that I had confused being exploited with being needed. The moment everything changed forever was when Piper turned 7. I had planned that celebration for months, saving every penny I could to buy her the perfect gift. I knew Piper loved horses, so I spent $300 on a themed dollhouse I had seen at the downtown toy store. It was a beautiful piece with miniature stables, small horses of different colors, and even tiny leather saddles. The night before her birthday, I worked until 2 in the morning, wrapping each small piece separately so Piper would have many little gifts to open. I used gold paper that I had bought especially for the occasion and tied each package with pink ribbons that matched the decor I knew Vanessa had chosen for the party. I arrived at the celebration with my arms full of perfectly wrapped packages, excited to see Piper's face when she discovered what was inside. But from the moment I crossed the door, I knew something was different. Vanessa greeted me with a tense smile, and Danny avoided eye contact with me completely. "Grace, so glad you made it," Vanessa said with that sweet fake voice she had perfected over the years. "Can you put the gifts over there on that table?" She pointed to a small table in the corner, far away from where all the other gifts were piled up. It was evident that my gifts were being segregated from the rest, as if they weren't good enough to mix with the others. The party was full of children Piper's age and their parents, people I didn't know, but who were clearly part of Danny and Vanessa's social circle. I sat in an isolated chair watching my family interact naturally with these strangers while completely ignoring me. It was as if I were invisible, as if my presence had no impact on the atmosphere of the celebration. When it was time to open the gifts, Piper went first to the main pile of presents. She opened a new bicycle that one of her friend's parents had given her, then a video game from her paternal aunt and uncle, then an expensive doll she had specifically asked for and that Danny and Vanessa had bought her. Each gift was received with screams of joy and enthusiastic hugs. My gifts were left for last, almost as an obligation. Piper approached the corner table with less enthusiasm than she had shown all afternoon. She began to open the small packages I had wrapped so carefully, but I could immediately notice that her interest was forced. Other children had started to get bored, and some parents were already checking their phones. "How pretty, Grandma!" Piper exclaimed each time she opened a piece, but her words sounded rehearsed, as if someone had coached her on what to say. There were no shouts of excitement, no genuine look of astonishment she had shown with the other gifts, just forced courtesy and smiles that didn't reach her eyes. What hurt the most was realizing that Piper didn't even understand what the complete set was. To her, each little package was an individual gift unconnected to the others. The equestrian dollhouse I had envisioned as a magical play experience had become a disorganized collection of loose pieces that made no sense together. "Can I go play with my new bike?" Piper asked before finishing the last package. Vanessa immediately nodded, and all the children ran out to the backyard. Leaving my gifts scattered on the table as if they were trash someone would have to clean up later. I sat there watching as the pieces of my perfect gift lay abandoned among the crumpled paper and untied ribbons. 300 thrown away. But what truly broke my heart wasn't the lost money, but the realization that nothing I did would ever be enough for this family. Danny approached me as I tried to pick up the pieces of the dollhouse. "Mom, you didn't have to spend so much money. You know, Piper has plenty of toys." His tone was condescending, as if I were a silly old woman who didn't understand the real needs of a modern child. "Next time, it's better just to give us cash. It's more practical." Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. After all the years of loans, co-signing, and financial sacrifices, Danny had the nerve to suggest I simply give them money directly, instead of bothering to find meaningful gifts. To him, I had become nothing more than an ATM with legs. That night, when I arrived home with the remnants of the dollhouse Piper had abandoned, I sat in my kitchen and cried for the first time in months. I didn't cry about the money spent or the rejected gift. I cried because I had finally understood that I was not a cherished grandmother in that house. I was a convenient provider of funds who was tolerated as long as I remained financially useful. The following months were a succession of increasingly brazen requests. Danny needed money to fix the air conditioning. Vanessa wanted me to pay for Piper's piano lessons. Piper needed new clothes for the private school they had decided to send her to without consulting me, despite the fact that I was paying a significant part of her educational expenses. Each request was accompanied by the same attitude, that it was my responsibility as a mother and grandmother to provide these funds. They never presented themselves as favors or as loans that would someday be repaid. They were demands disguised as normal family requests. The last straw came when Vanessa asked me to pay for their family summer vacation. "Piper has never been to the beach," she explained with that manipulative voice she had perfected. "All her friends are going with their families this summer. We don't want her to feel excluded. The vacation package cost $2,500. It was money I didn't have without completely emptying my emergency account, but the emotional pressure was overwhelming. The image of Piper feeling left out of her classmates' conversations broke my heart. What kind of grandmother would let her granddaughter miss out on important experiences because of money? I paid for the vacation, working extra shifts for 3 months to cover that expense without being completely without savings. And while I worked extra hours cleaning offices until my knees ached, my family enjoyed a week in the Bahamas, uploading happy photos to social media from expensive restaurants and paradise beaches. Was I invited to join them? Of course not. We didn't think you'd be interested, Mom. You're not really a beach person, Danny explained when they returned, tanned and relaxed, as if the fact that I had paid for the entire trip didn't even entitle me to be considered for an invitation. It was at that moment, seeing the photographs of my family's vacation, funded by me but without me, that something definitively broke inside me. It wasn't love I felt for this family. It was an addiction to being needed, a desperation to maintain some kind of connection, even if it was toxic and unilateral. And now, after the humiliation of this night, after Piper threw grape juice on me in front of strangers while my whole family laughed, the moment of truth had finally arrived. I could no longer deceive myself into thinking things would get better, or that someday they would properly thank me for everything I had sacrificed for them. It was time for them to learn how much they truly depended on the old Grace they loved to humiliate. On Monday morning, I woke up with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in years. I hadn't cried during the night or lost sleep, wondering if perhaps I had overreacted to the birthday events. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what I had to do and how I was going to do it. I had a quiet breakfast while reviewing all the documents I had kept in my safety deposit box for the past 6 years. Loan contracts, bank transfer receipts, cosigner documents, receipts for payments I had made on behalf of Danny and Vanessa. It was staggering to see it all together. I had spent more than $43,000 in total keeping my family's financial life afloat. I made the first call at exactly 9 in the morning. I dialed the number for attorney Silas Jenkins, the lawyer who had handled my husband, Robert Bob Whitman's will. Silas was 72 years old, but his mind was still sharp as a scalpel. For the last few years, he had handled some minor matters for me, mainly related to my life insurance and some employment contracts. Good morning, Attorney Jenkins. This is Grace Whitman. I need you to help me with an urgent family matter. I need to review all the legal implications of withdrawing my name as the cosigner on my son's house mortgage. My voice sounded firmer than it had in months. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Silas had known Danny since he was a child and knew how difficult my financial situation had been since Bob's death. Grace, are you sure you want to do this? Once you withdraw your co-signature, the bank could demand immediate payment of the full balance or proceed with foreclosure. Exactly, I replied with a calm that surprised me. That is precisely what I want to happen. I briefly explained the events of the previous day without going into emotional details, sticking only to the concrete facts. Silas listened in silence, asking occasional questions about dates and amounts. I understand your situation, Grace. Let me review the original contracts and I'll tell you what options we have. You can come to my office this afternoon at 3. I confirmed the appointment and hung up, feeling more alive than I had in years. The second call was to the bank where Danny and Vanessa held their mortgage. I asked to speak with the loan officer who had handled the original case, a man named Mr. David Sterling, who knew my cosigner payment history well. Mr. Sterling, I need information about the process for withdrawing as cosigner for the property on Elmwood Avenue. David sounded confused. For the past 3 years, I had been the one who always called when there were payment issues, the one who always found ways to cover the shortfalls. Ms. Whitman, is there a problem with the loan? The payments are current this month. There is no problem with the current payments, I explained calmly. I simply want to explore my legal options for withdrawing my responsibility as cosigner. David explained that it was technically possible, but it would require Danny and Vanessa to qualify for the loan themselves or find another cosigner. If they couldn't do either, the bank would have the right to demand payment of the full outstanding balance. What is the current balance of the loan? I asked, though I already had an approximate idea. $37,000, Ms. Whitman. The figure hit me hard, though it shouldn't have surprised me. Between the original mortgage, the cash-out refinances they had done, and the accrued interest over years of irregular payments, the debt had grown considerably. I understand. Could you email me a complete statement of account and the necessary documentation to initiate the cosigner withdrawal process? Mr. Sterling agreed, though I could hear concern in his voice. He was probably already calculating the chances of Danny and Vanessa handling that debt on their own. After hanging up, I made a cup of coffee and sat in my living room to process what I'd set in motion. I felt neither guilt nor regret, just a strange sense of liberation, as if I'd been carrying an enormous weight for years and had finally given myself permission to drop it. For the first time in years, I went to sleep with a smile on my face. 3 weeks after signing the papers with Silas, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. It was Danny, and his voice sounded completely different from the last time we'd spoken. The casual confidence he always had when asking for money or favors was gone. Now he sounded desperate and confused. "Mom, we got a letter from the bank. They say you're going to withdraw your co-signature from our house. This has to be a mistake, right? You would never do something like this without telling us first." I could hear Vanessa yelling in the background about lawyers and lawsuits. "It is not a mistake. Danny, the letter is correct." My response was quiet and direct. No long justifications. No emotional explanations. The facts were enough. Silence. I heard his quick breathing as he processed what I'd confirmed. "Why would you do this, Mom? Is it because of what happened at the party? That was just a kid's prank." He was trying to shrink a deliberate humiliation into innocent mischief. "Of course, Danny, kids will be kids. I'm well." I kept it short, neutral. "This isn't about children's pranks. This is about the fact that for 6 years, I have been financially responsible for a house where I'm not welcome, where I'm treated like a problem, where you allow me to be publicly humiliated without consequences." My voice stayed calm, but there was a firmness in it he'd never heard before. "But Mom, this is our home. Piper grew up here. You can't do this." Panic edged his words. He was realizing the mother he knew how to manipulate was gone. "This is the house I've been paying for 6 years, Danny. A house you bought, remodeled, and enjoyed while I worked double shifts to cover late payments. A house where you celebrated the kitchen I financed without even inviting me to see it. It's time you take responsibility for your own decisions." I hung up before he could respond. 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. Vanessa. Where Danny had panicked, she came in hot with rage. "Grace, how dare you do this? We're your family. You can't let Piper lose her home over an old woman's tantrum." The venom under her forced courtesy was finally unmasked. "Vanessa, you decided I don't have a place in that family. Now you'll learn what life is like without my financial support. You're a bitter, selfish old woman. We always knew it. You're going to destroy your granddaughter's life for revenge." She screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away. The only people destroying Piper's life are her parents, who spent money they didn't have and taught her it's okay to disrespect her grandmother. I hung up again and unplugged the landline. For days, they tried every strategy. Danny waited for me in parking lots, red-eyed and sleepless. "Mom, please, let's talk like adults. I know you're hurt, but this is going too far. We can fix things. Danny, for 6 years I've been the adult, working extra hours to maintain your house while you treated me like I was invisible. Now it's your turn to act like an adult and face the consequences." I didn't wait for his reply. I walked to my car and drove away. Next, they sent Piper. One afternoon, I found her on the steps of my building, school uniform dirty, eyes swollen from crying. She'd walked 8 blocks from school, something her parents would never have allowed under normal circumstances. "Grandma, Mom says, you're going to make us lose our house." "Is it true?" For a moment, guilt pricked my chest. Then I remembered those same eyes looking at me with contempt as grape juice bled down my dress. "Piper, tell your mom that adults make adult decisions. This isn't your responsibility." I walked her home, steady despite tears and questions. Danny and Vanessa were waiting, faces swinging between hope and fury. "Mom, look what you're doing to Piper. Is this what you want? To see your granddaughter suffer?" Danny pointed at her. She clung to Vanessa's leg, sobbing. "What I don't want is my granddaughter growing up thinking it's okay to disrespect elders because her parents allow it." My words cut the air like broken glass. Piper is suffering because you're using her as an emotional pawn instead of teaching her that actions have consequences. That night, someone keyed my car, scratching "selfish" in big letters down the driver's side and deflating all 4 tires. The officer who took the report asked if I had suspects. "I have some ideas, but I can't prove it," I said. He nodded. He'd seen this kind of family spiral before. "Ma'am, I recommend installing security cameras. These cases tend to get worse before they get better." He was right. The next week, rotten eggs on my door. Then balloons filled with red paint splattering my windows. Each incident too small for serious charges, but just enough to make home feel hostile. Danny started appearing outside the offices I cleaned at night. "Mom, this is ridiculous. We're family. Families don't destroy each other over misunderstandings." His voice had shifted, less pleading now, more of a threat under the words. "Families also don't humiliate their mothers in front of strangers. If you want to fix this, start with a real apology and show you understand what you did wrong. We already apologized. What more do you want?" He was boiling over. "Danny, you never apologized. You minimized it and blamed me for being too sensitive. Fine, we're sorry. Happy now? Now take your name off the cosign and stop ruining our lives." He shouted so loud other employees came out to look. That's not an apology. That's rage dressed up as remorse. A real apology means understanding why it was wrong and changing your behavior, not saying words to get what you want. I walked away. When I got home, all 4 tires were slashed and the windshield was shattered. A note was taped to my door. "Last chance, you crazy old woman. Sign the papers or things get worse." For the first time in weeks, doubt flickered. Had I gone too far? Was this worth it? Then I remembered the laughter as grape juice slid down my dress. The years I'd been an ATM with legs. All the humiliations I'd swallowed. No, I hadn't gone too far. I was just getting started. The call that changed everything came on a Wednesday morning over breakfast. Brenda Miller, the secretary at the construction company where Danny worked 2 years ago. She'd always been kind. "Ms. Whitman, I need to talk to you about something important. Can we meet in private?" Her voice was nervous, like someone might be listening. "It's about Danny and some documents we found while clearing old files." We met that afternoon at a small coffee shop near my apartment. Brenda arrived clutching a manila folder like it held dangerous secrets. Hands trembling, she ordered coffee and then opened the folder. "What I'm about to show you could get me in trouble, but you have a right to know." Inside were photocopies of falsified invoices Danny had submitted, reimbursements for materials never purchased. His handwriting had altered amounts. A $300 lumber invoice changed to $1,300. A $200 cement invoice bumped to $700. At least 15 documents, clear evidence of fraud. "How much did he take?" I asked, my voice calm despite the earthquake under my ribs. "About $8,000 over 6 months. The owner never pressed charges. Danny was popular and he didn't want trouble. He just fired him and kept it quiet." Brenda watched me, bracing for tears. "Why tell me now?" 2 years had passed. Yesterday, Danny came asking for a letter of recommendation. He said he needed proof he was reliable to get a bank loan. He also said you were being problematic, trying to sabotage his finances out of spite. That didn't sound like the woman I know. The pieces clicked. Danny needed that letter because without a co-signer, he had to prove steady income to keep the house. He was also building a story where I was the irrational villain, prepping for when the mortgage mess went public. "Can I keep copies?" Brenda nodded and handed me the whole folder. "There's more," she said. "Patrice Washington from HR says Danny faked overtime. And he sold company tools and kept the cash. The son I thought I knew dissolved. This wasn't bad luck. It was patterned deceit." That night I called the first number. Darren Scott, a construction supervisor. "Ms. Whitman, your son has serious honesty problems. I caught him stealing tools and selling them online. When I confronted him, He threatened to accuse me of theft if I spoke up. Then Patrice Washington, she confirmed the fake overtime and added something that chilled me. Danny used to brag that he'd tricked his mother into co-signing. He'd say I didn't understand what I was signing and was easy to manipulate because I was afraid of losing my family. The words punched through me. This wasn't just financial fraud. It was calculated emotional manipulation. Third call, Leonard Bell, an accountant who handled some company accounts. Ms. Whitman, Danny asked me a few months ago to falsify income statements. Offered $500, I refused. I worry he found someone who didn't. I spread the documents across my coffee table. It wasn't one lie, it was a web stretched over years. The emergencies I'd paid for? Likely the fallout from jobs lost due to stealing, not the economy. The next day, I brought everything to Silas Jenkins. His eyes widened as he read. Grace, this is serious. Your son defrauded employers, and you could press criminal charges. Silas, I don't want to charge my own son. I want it documented, in case he tries to sue me or create legal trouble over my co-signature withdrawal. We'll prepare a sworn statement and be ready if needed. I also suggest we notify the bank about any fraudulent income documents Danny may have submitted. That afternoon, Danny was waiting in my parking lot, this time with two men I didn't recognize, both hard-looking, both aggressive. My first instinct was to turn away, but running would give them exactly what they wanted. Mom, these are my friends, Alfred and Manny. They understand business and family, and they think you should reconsider the house situation. Danny's tone was colder, calculated. One stepped closer with a smile that never reached his eyes. Ms. Whitman, your son told us about your family situation. We believe in keeping families together. Maybe we can help resolve this. Misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, gentlemen, I said, voice steady though my heart hammered. There is a decision I've made after years of being mistreated by my own family. The second man laughed, cruel and low. Ma'am, sometimes older people get confused about what's best for everyone. Maybe you need someone to help you see things more clearly. It was at that moment that I understood Danny had crossed a line I never thought he would cross. He was willing to use physical intimidation against his own mother to get what he wanted. But what he didn't know was that now I had weapons he had never imagined I possessed. Danny, tell your friends to leave and tell your wife that the threats and vandalism are going to stop right now, or all the information I have about your fraudulent activities will go directly to the relevant authorities. The expression on his face changed immediately. What are you talking about? I took out my phone and showed him a photo of one of the falsified documents Brenda had given me. I'm talking about this and much more. Now get off my property before I call the police. For the first time in our lives, I was the one who held all the power. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was a formal lawsuit filed by Danny and Vanessa against me, accusing me of malicious family abandonment and intentional destruction of family assets. They had hired a lawyer named Arthur Trevino, who apparently specialized in family disputes and elder manipulation cases. When I showed the documents to Silas, he laughed for the first time since he had started handling my case. Grace, this is exactly what we expected them to do. By suing you, they have opened the door for us to present all the evidence we have compiled about Danny's fraudulent activities. The lawsuit alleged that I had abused my position as co-signer to emotionally manipulate a young family and had used financial blackmail for personal revenge. According to the document, I was a confused, vindictive older woman who was destroying my granddaughter's stability due to irrational resentments. Silas, they really think they're going to win this case? The absurdity of their allegations seemed evident to me, but I knew the legal system sometimes worked in unpredictable ways. Grace, they don't expect to win this case. What they expect is to pressure you to get scared and withdraw your co-signer cancellation request before we get to trial. It's a legal intimidation tactic. But what they don't know, Silas organized all our documents on his desk, is that we have enough evidence not only to defend ourselves, but to file a counterclaim for fraud and restitution. Preparation for the trial took 3 intense weeks. Silas had contacted Brenda Miller, Darren Scott, Patrice Washington, and Leonard Bell as witnesses. He had also obtained official documents from the bank showing all the payments I had made as co-signer over the past 6 years, a total of $23,400 in payments that Danny and Vanessa had been unable to cover. On the day of the trial, I arrived at the courthouse wearing my best black suit and carrying a folder with copies of all the evidence. Danny and Vanessa were sitting on the other side of the room with their lawyer, avoiding eye contact with me. Vanessa was wearing a conservative dress and a practiced victim expression, while Danny looked tense and nervous. The judge was a woman around 50 years old named Honorable Judge Evelyn Thorne. She had read all the pretrial documents and seemed to have little patience for cases she considered frivolous family disputes. Her first question was direct. "Mr. Trevino, explain to me exactly what Ms. Whitman violated by exercising her legal right to withdraw her co-signature from a mortgage loan." Danny's lawyer stammered for a moment before responding. "Your Honor, our position is that Ms. Whitman is using this legal right maliciously with the specific intention of causing emotional and financial harm to her family." "I understand your position, Mr. Trevino, but can you cite any legal precedent that establishes that exercising a legal right becomes illegal based on the person's emotional motivations?" The judge was clearly unimpressed with the plaintiff's arguments. When it was Silas's turn to present our defense, he began by showing the complete chronology of my financial support to Danny and Vanessa. "Your Honor, Ms. Whitman is not acting out of malice. She is acting as any reasonable person would after years of financial and emotional abuse." He presented copies of all the bank transfers I had made, all the mortgage payments I had covered, and all the loans I had granted that had never been repaid. The total amounted to $43,200 over 6 years. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have discovered evidence that Mr. Danny Whitman has been involved in fraudulent activities that directly affected Ms. Whitman's ability to make informed financial decisions. Silas began presenting the falsified documents that Brenda had found, the sworn statements from Danny's former co-workers, and the evidence that Danny had been lying about his income and job stability for years. Danny's lawyer stood up abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. This evidence is not relevant to the issue of the mortgage cosign." Judge Thorne looked at him with a severe expression. "Mr. Trevino, you opened the door to the question of character and motivations when you alleged that my client was acting maliciously. Mr. Whitman's previous conduct is absolutely relevant to establishing a pattern of dishonest behavior toward his mother, Brenda." Miller was the first witness to take the stand. She spoke clearly and calmly about the fraudulent documents she had found, about the admissions Danny had made about manipulating his mother, and about his recent attempt to obtain false letters of recommendation. "Ms. Miller, did Mr. Whitman ever express remorse for defrauding his previous employer?" Silas asked. "No, sir. In fact, when I spoke with him last week, he told me that his mother was a difficult woman who didn't understand how modern families work. He said she was being selfish for not continuing to support them financially." When Darren Scott testified about the theft of tools and the threats Danny had made to him, I could see the judge's expression hardening more and more. When Patrice Washington told about the faked overtime hours and Danny's derogatory comments about my supposed naivete, the judge took extensive notes. The most impactful moment came when Silas called me to the stand to testify. I had practiced my testimony for days, but when the moment came to speak, the words flowed naturally. "Your Honor, for 6 years, I have worked double shifts, emptied my savings, and mortgaged my financial future to keep afloat a family that treated me like I was invisible. I paid for vacations I was not invited to, for renovations I could not enjoy, for a house where my presence was tolerated but not desired. I described the incident at Vanessa's birthday party, the public humiliation I had suffered, and the years of emotional abuse I had silently endured. Your Honor, the day my own granddaughter Piper threw grape juice on me while my whole family laughed, I finally understood that it wasn't love that kept me helping them. It was fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of admitting that the people for whom I had sacrificed everything didn't truly want me. When Danny's lawyer tried to cross-examine me, his questions focused on trying to paint me as a confused, vindictive older woman. "Ms. Whitman, isn't it true that you are doing this out of spite because you felt offended at a family party?" "No, sir. I am doing this because I finally understood that for years, I have been the victim of emotional and financial fraud. My son and his wife built their lifestyle on lies and on my money. And when I tried to set boundaries, they resorted to intimidation and vandalism. I presented the photographs of the damage to my car, the written threats I had received, and testified about the intimidating men Danny had brought to pressure me. Your Honor, a mother who truly loves her family does not resort to physical intimidation when that family sets reasonable financial boundaries. When all the testimonies ended, the judge retired to deliberate for 1 hour. When she returned, her verdict was clear and unequivocal. This court finds that Ms. Grace Whitman has acted within her legal rights in withdrawing her co-signature from the mortgage loan in question. Furthermore, this court finds compelling evidence of a pattern of fraudulent and manipulative behavior on the part of Mr. Danny Whitman toward his mother. The judge ordered that the lawsuit against me be dismissed completely. Furthermore, she ordered that Danny and Vanessa pay all my legal costs, a total of $4,500. She also issued a restraining order prohibiting them from contacting me or approaching my property for 1 full year. Mr. Whitman, this court warns that any future harassment or intimidation toward your mother will result in criminal charges. Ms. Whitman has the right to live free from threats and manipulation, even when those threats come from members of her own family. When I left the courthouse that afternoon, Silas shook my hand with a genuine smile. Grace, you won more than a legal case today. You won your freedom. For the first time in 6 years, I felt completely free. 2 years have passed since the day of the trial. 2 years in which my life has changed in ways I never would have imagined possible. I am sitting in the small coffee shop that I opened with the money I had been spending on keeping Danny and Vanessa's financial life afloat. Robert's Corner is named after my late husband, and every morning when I open the doors, I feel as if he is here with me, proud of the woman I have finally become. The coffee shop is located downtown in a space I rent for $900 a month. With the $4,500 that Danny and Vanessa had to pay me for legal costs, plus the savings I accumulated by no longer covering their expenses, I was able to make the necessary renovations and purchase the initial equipment. It is not a luxurious place, but it is mine. The walls are painted a warm cream color. There are plants in every corner and soft jazz plays to create a cozy atmosphere. I serve fresh coffee, homemade pastries that I bake every morning, and simple sandwiches for lunch. My regulars include office workers, college students, and senior couples who come for some quiet. Brenda Miller became my first part-time employee. After she testified on my behalf, she lost her job at the construction office because the boss feared retaliation from other corrupt employees. Ms. Whitman, she told me when I offered her the job, working for you is an honor. I finally get to work for someone who values honesty. The coffee shop generates enough income to cover my living expenses and lets me save a little each month. It isn't a fortune, but it's honest stability built on my own efforts, not on someone else's manipulation. Every dollar in my register is clean, earned through hard work and fair dealing. Mornings are my favorite. I arrive at 5:30 to start baking. The smell of cinnamon and coffee filling the empty space gives me a peace I hadn't felt in years. No phone ringing with emergencies, no drama. Just the honest work of making something that makes people happy. My regulars have become a kind of chosen family. There is Mrs. Hortensia, a 75-year-old who comes Tuesdays and Thursdays for a latte and tells me about her grandkids in another city. Unlike my experience with Piper, Mrs. Hortensia talks about them with real pride, and they call her often. There's also Mr. Manuel, a widower my age who shows up every morning at 8:00 for breakfast before his part-time bookstore shift. We've formed a friendship built on quiet talks about books, movies, and life. No drama, no manipulation, just two adults who enjoy each other's company. On weekends, I host small events, poetry nights, board games for seniors, and book swaps. People come who, like me, have learned that real community is built on mutual respect and shared interests, not forced obligations. The restraining order against Danny and Vanessa expired 6 months ago, but they haven't tried to contact me. Through mutual acquaintances, I've heard they lost the house 3 months after the trial. The bank foreclosed just as Silas predicted, and they moved to a smaller apartment in a rougher neighborhood. Danny works landscaping for minimum wage, the only job he could get after word of his fraud spread in the construction community. Vanessa took a full-time job at a supermarket. Their lifestyle changed drastically, but at least now they're living within their means instead of on mine. News about Piper reaches me now and then through Mrs. Hortensia, who knows some moms at her school. Piper adapted better than expected. Seeing her parents work hard taught her responsibility, lessons she never learned when everything came easy. 3 weeks ago, I saw Piper from my shop window. She was in uniform with a friend, laughing. Taller now, more serious but more genuine too. For a moment, our eyes met. She paused. In her eyes, I saw recognition and maybe understanding. Not the defiant look of the girl who threw juice on me. The look of someone who learned that actions have consequences and that respect is earned. She lifted her hand a little, as if to wave, then kept walking. I don't resent Piper. She was a child being used by adults who didn't know how to teach values. Now life is teaching her, and that may be the best teacher of all. Silas Jenkins visits once a month for a black coffee and my lemon cake. Grace, he told me recently, you're why justice is worth fighting for. You didn't just defend yourself, you probably saved that family from worse consequences. He's right. By forcing Danny and Vanessa to face reality, I gave them a chance to build honestly instead of on lies. It's a hard lesson, but one they needed before things got worse. My apartment feels different now. Not a hiding place from a cruel family, but my home. Decorated with things I love, full of books I enjoy, visited by people who value me. I care for plants, hang paintings that make me smile, and rest in the quiet that comes from knowing no one can jerk my emotions to pry loose my money. On Sundays, instead of awkward family dinners, I go to a small, predominantly black church nearby. After service, I often have lunch with friends who know me as Grace, the coffee shop owner, not Grace, the mother to be exploited. This morning at 66, I looked in the little mirror behind the counter. A few more wrinkles than 2 years ago, but eyes bright with a confidence I hadn't seen in decades. I'm not rich. I don't have big holiday gatherings. I don't have grandkids calling about grades. But I have what I lacked for years: self-respect and control over my life. The best revenge, they say, is living well. And for the first time in my adult life, that's exactly what I'm doing. One afternoon, as I locked up after a good day, I noticed a familiar figure across the street. Danny, thinner, in dirty work clothes, watching my cafe from a distance. He didn't approach. He didn't try to come in. He stood there a few minutes, then moved on. In his eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before. Respect. Maybe even a little pride. His mother, the woman he underestimated for so long, had built something with her own hands. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was an independent businesswoman who had found her dignity. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and walked home under the afternoon sun. Tomorrow would be another day of honest work, another day on my own terms. And I couldn't be happier. 6 more months passed. This November morning, I woke to the news that my coffee shop was selected Small Business of the Month by the local Chamber of Commerce. The plaque arrives next week along with a newspaper article, my photo, and the story of how a 66-year-old woman started her first business. The irony isn't lost on me. For decades, my family never believed I could do anything on my own. Now strangers recognize me as a successful entrepreneur who helps the community. Brenda brought my coffee grinning. Ms. Whitman, my daughter asked if you'd advise her on opening a bakery. She says you're her inspiration for older women who keep growing. I laughed, remembering how often Danny and Vanessa hinted I was too old to understand the modern world. The chamber invite includes speaking at a seniors entrepreneurship seminar. Apparently, my story inspires people who thought it was too late to start. The coordinator said there's growing demand for stories like mine, people who found purpose after 60. Mr. Manuel has become more than a regular. Lately, we walk in the park on Sundays after I close. Yesterday, he brought wildflowers from his morning walk. Simple, genuine. It's refreshing to be with someone who wants nothing except my company. Grace, he said over apple pie. "It's admirable how you built all this after what you went through." We rarely talk about the past, but when we do, he treats it with respect, never pity. Last week I expanded the menu, stews, soups, and home-style dishes I start before dawn. Demand is so strong I'm considering hiring another part-timer for the kitchen. Strange to think that less than 3 years ago I worried about my own bills. And now I'm creating jobs. Our weekend events have grown too. This Saturday we'll host our first story swap night, customers sharing life experiences. The idea came when Mrs. Hortensia said many older folks feel invisible in a youth-obsessed culture. My cafe is a place where life experience counts as wisdom, not irrelevance. Yesterday, I received an unexpected letter from Darren Scott, the supervisor who testified. He wrote that Danny applied to his new company. He rejected the application due to history. "Ms. Whitman, your brave choice to expose the truth protected other employers. Your son needed real consequences to have any chance to change." I thought about that. Did my decision help Danny in the long run? I think yes. For years, my rescues taught him he could dodge consequences. Now he finally feels the link between choices and results. Brenda said she saw him last week. Focused on a yard crew, tired but working. Really working. 2 weeks ago, while sorting old papers, I found the Bahamas photo I'd paid for. Danny, Vanessa, Piper, all smiling. No sign the trip was financed by someone unwelcome to join. For the first time, it didn't hurt. I felt a kind of satisfaction. Those were the last unearned vacations. Any future trips they take will be bought with honest work and planning. In a way, refusing to be their endless bank was the best gift I could have given them. My therapist, Dr. Laura Muñoz, suggested I journal the experience. "Grace," she said, "your story can help others facing family financial abuse, especially women your age who feel trapped." I've started writing at night after closing. It isn't easy to revisit manipulation and self-deception, but it's freeing to put it into words, how I found strength to change. Maybe someday it'll become a book or a series of articles to help others. What surprises me most about this phase is how productive I feel. For years, my energy was drained by crises that never ended. Now it's channeled into creating, building, contributing. It's like I found a reservoir of creativity and ambition that slept for decades. Last month, a young reporter interviewed me for a piece on women entrepreneurs. She asked if I regret the drastic choices with my family. My answer was immediate. The only regret I have is waiting so long to properly value myself. That line became the pull quote. Since then, women come to the cafe to share their stories of hard family ties. I'm not alone. And it's empowering to show it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. This morning, while I prepped pastries, I realized November arrived, and I hadn't even worried about the holidays. For decades, this season meant anxiety, more unappreciated gifts, more gatherings where I felt like an unwanted guest. This year is different. Brenda and I will decorate the cafe and offer holiday specials. Mr. Manuel has no plans for Christmas Eve. Mrs. Hortensia's kids can't visit. I'm considering a small Christmas dinner here for regulars who, like me, built family out of kindness and respect. The truth is, at 66, I'm happier and more complete than I've been since 20. It's a different happiness, not based on approval or feeling needed. It comes from within, from knowing I built something valuable with my own hands and finally learned to respect myself. Tomorrow starts another day at my cafe. Another day serving people who value what I offer. Another day living on my terms. And that's exactly how it should be. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you enjoyed the story, you can support me with a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your kindness. I'm looking forward to your comments. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories I highly recommend. There's much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.